Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Let the Record Show with Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the county chair of the Suffolk County Party, as well as the vice chair of the New York State Republican Party. With us is noted commentator, attorney, and essayist, our co-host, Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg, and I'm delighted to bring back on Let the Record Show our good friend, Dr. Mark Meirowitz. Mark is a Ph.D. Mark is an attorney. He's a professor at the Maritime College, part of SUNY. He's a noted expert in foreign affairs, national security policy, an expert on the Middle East, and a great knowledge of places like Turkey and Syria and Israel and the whole Middle East. So, Mark, welcome back to Let the Record Show. All three of us are just delighted to have you back.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege and a pleasure.
So the three matters that I'm concerned about, then I'll turn you over to Eric and to Jesse, but I want your thoughts on this. I'm very concerned about what's going on with Gaza because I think this so-called Board of Peace is problematic. Hamas is still in play there. They've retrenched, and that troubles me enormously. I'm very concerned about what's going on in Syria and what they're doing against the Kurds, who are allies. And I'm very concerned about what the United States is doing to protect the Kurds, or selling out the Kurds. And we have a bad history, whether the Democratic or Republican administrations, of selling out the Kurds, who are good allies. And then the third thing that I'm concerned about is Turkey, which goes back to the so-called Board of Peace that Trump is trumpeting. And he wants Turkey and he wants Qatar in that mix. And I'm saying these are friends and allies and supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood. I don't want them involved in policing Gaza or having military strength there. So those are my concerns. Now I'll turn you over to Eric for a Syrian cross-examination.
Well, Mark, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
To pick up on Richard's point regarding this this Board of Peace, there have been some criticisms coming from the UN. I don't know why anybody really cares what the UN thinks, but there are criticisms coming from the UN that Trump is setting up this Board of Peace as a way to replace the UN, certainly as it relates to the Middle East and in Gaza. What is your sense of that? Do you think it's that he's putting this in place to substitute for the UN, augment the UN, or just some random choice of countries?
You know, I think about it. I think Trump is the chairman of the Board of Peace. And I think what he's setting up, not only a mini UN, but he's setting up, I think, a legacy for himself, because I think he will serve in an infinite basis. He continues to serve. Maybe he even serves after he leaves office. So maybe he's thinking about his legacy, and he wants to be in the international picture going forward, even after his term ends. And the interesting thing about the Board of Peace is that the United Nations, when it established this Board of Peace, established it to relate to Gaza. And actually, Secretary Rubio reaffirmed that. But if you hear what is being discussed about this is actually a full structure that is going to take on, who knows, not just Gaza. I thought the idea of this was to solve the Gaza issue. If we're going to spread it out and bring on all these parties and create, and I've read the charter of the Board of Peace, and I can't understand it. If you give $1 billion, you're a member for good, and other people can serve for 3 years. You know, it sounds to me like the UN Charter gone completely berserk, because we know the UN Charter is problematic, as you alluded to the United Nations. Why build another structure like this? Why not just have an agreement or a structure to solve the Gaza crisis? The other thing I would say is missing from the statement from this technocrat Palestinian and also in the charter is anything about Hamas. and Hamas being destroyed and eliminated. I didn't see it anywhere. So I don't know whether this is about Gaza or about Hamas, or it's whether it's about creating a mini UN or what. It doesn't sound like it's off to a good start.
Well, of course, Phase 2 wasn't supposed to kick in until Phase 1 was complete, and Phase 1 involved the return of all the hostages, including the dead ones. There's still one dead body currently being held by Hamas, and it required that Hamas would lay down their weapons and surrender, and they haven't done that either. They're maintaining their weapons. So it's premature, based on my understanding of what the peace agreement was supposed to, the 20-point plan was supposed to be before we got to Phase 2. But on that point, and picking up on something you said, one of the reasons the UN is such a colossal failure is that every country gets one vote, and most of the countries there are not Western liberal democracies, so they vote their own interest. And countries like the United States, which funds the UN primarily, their interest, they find the UN is antithetical to what they're trying to achieve. Now fast forward to the Board of Peace. If you put countries like Turkey and Qatar, which are Muslim Brotherhood supporting countries, who are trying to save Hamas, that's their goal here, is to save Hamas, because that's their ally there. And if they want to maintain their relevance, Turkey and Qatar, the way they help maintain their relevance is by supporting and saving Hamas. Why put countries like Turkey or Qatar on the Board of Peace if you're attempting to solve the problems in Gaza, if indeed the root problem in Gaza is the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas?
Well, it's an interesting thing that you said. I also think about the United Nations, that maybe a benefit or a detriment of it is the veto. And it's a structure that was put into place after the Second World War to get the world to stop aggression. It hasn't done that, obviously. Look at Iran. And interestingly enough, one could note that, as Judge Weinberg pointed out, what's going on in Syria, the catastrophe against the Kurds in Syria, the UN, has anybody heard a word from the UN? So this is a problem. The other problem is, what's the structure? You mentioned one vote, one state, all of that. If you look through this charter, it really isn't a structure for dealing with this. And last point I would make about Turkey and Qatar is, does that mean that Turkey and Qatar and a number of the other states are going to have either civilians or military troops in Gaza? That is something that I don't think is going to be necessarily a very good thing, because then you end up with Turkish troops in Syria and, of course, the influence of Qatar, and Israel is kind of squashed in between all of that. And that's worrisome, I believe.
Well, Bibi has been very clear. There's no way they are going to allow, Israel is going to allow either Turkey or Qatar, but primarily Turkey, to have any military presence in Gaza. They're just not going to do it, because a Turkish military presence in Gaza is actually more dangerous than Hamas military presence.
Yeah, because they have a real army.
They have a real army, and they're a real country.
And they expect the United States to give them good planes.
And if God forbid there's some sort of altercation between Israel and Turkey, which is a NATO nation, are they there in their capacity as a NATO nation and they can invoke Article 5? Or are they there in some other capacity outside of NATO, and it's okay for Israel and Turkey to have an armed conflict without worrying about bringing in Western European countries and the United States? So it's truly problematic. But just to the Kurds for a second.
Yes.
The Kurds have been fighting with us in Syria. My son was
with us.
My son led a mortar platoon in Syria 2018, 2019, and he was fighting with Kurds. They were helping defeat ISIS, and they took the laboring war, and they took most of the dead and wounded were primarily Kurds to help save American troops. So the Kurds are kind of a lost people, but their curse is that they're spread out across Syria, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and the Turks in particular have no interest in a Kurdish nation. So I'm not sure how we deal with the Kurdish issue, particularly in light of what's going on in Syria. But do you see the United States selling out the Kurds again, or where do you see the Kurds fitting into the future of the Middle East?
It's a very, very sad and catastrophic situation. And to really cut to the chase, you really have to look at Tom Barrack, who is our ambassador to Turkey and our special envoy to Syria. I think he has completely messed this up, and in a dangerous way. And I think, to your first point about Gaza, what we see in Syria is kind of what's going to be brewing and happening in Gaza and everywhere else in the Middle East, because we're not properly managing these crises. Indeed, Tom Barrack has said, incredibly, that the function of the SDF in fighting ISIS is now expired. Why? Because Tom Barrack, on his own, has decided that the United States can rely on the Syrian government, on al-Shara or his Namdegher al-Jalani, to deal with this. We know that Syrian officers killed 3 U.S. service members, and in addition, a number of the ISIS prisoners have escaped from the prisons, which the SDF was protecting. And really what has happened with Barrack's assistance, the SDF has essentially been marginalized, and now they're fighting for their lives in Kobani. I mean, it's really a disaster, and it really is indicative of the fact, I think, just as a slight segue, that despite President Trump's incredible accomplishments, with these Greenland issues and these other issues, there's distraction and outsourcing of these important issues to friends of the president instead of somebody like Rubio, who's a accomplished Secretary of State. Barrack has really created a cataclysm here, as you say, for allies of the United States who fought with the United States against ISIS. And by the way, could be a resurgence of ISIS. Why is Turkey so concerned about it? Because they feel, or their position is, that the SDF, the YPG, that these forces
these are Kurdish organizations, so people
are allied with the PKK terrorists in Turkey, and because of that, what we end up with is a crushing disaster of the Kurds. But not only that, the Syrian administration has either wink, wink, not watched as Druze have been massacred and Christians and Alawites. So the whole thing is a disaster. And and as a matter of fact, the Wall Street Journal today has an incredible editorial called Tom Barrack's Syrian Adventure. And the journal says Turkey wants the Kurds of the SDF to be crushed as soon as possible, but America need not facilitate it. I think this is an important message.
All right, let me turn this to Jesse's chance to ask you some questions and have a discussion with you, Dr. Meirowitz.
Love to.
Jesse.
Love to.
Doctor, it's a pleasure to have you again. And I have 2 very quick questions. First of all, what is the current state of Syria now that the regime has changed there? What is their placement right now in the region and in their relationship with the United States? That's question number 1. Number 2, with the Muslim Brotherhood, and it seems like countries like Qatar and Turkey are a mixed bag, or like a 50-50, or there's more good than bad or more bad than good in dealing with the United States, dealing with them in diplomacy. How do you see, and how do we deal with that type of dichotomy of their prisoners in the regions? Sometimes they're allies, and sometimes they're not.
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
If you're a landlord, you know managing rentals on pen and paper can be a major headache. That's why there's RentRedi. RentRedi is a smarter, simpler way to collect rent automatically, screen tenants, track expenses, and keep up with tenants all in one place, so you can make time for what matters most. Try RentRedi today, risk-free, starting at just $5 a month at rentredi.com. That's RENTREDI.com.
Well, look, the regime in Syria, if you ask President Trump, he just said the other day He really likes al-Shara. He thinks he's a tough guy. He's got a rough resume. And he lifted the sanctions on al-Shara on the request of MBS as a leap of faith of what he was going to do. And now we see what he's done. And I think, by the way, Congress is going to push back on this in a big way. We heard from Lindsey Graham. So I think that one, Syria, is a warning. Now, the regime is not powerful yet. It's not a threat to the region. It's not even a threat significantly to Israel. But down the road, it's at least my prediction, if I can't look in a crystal ball, there will be another war somehow coming out of Syria because you have jihadis in charge, either possibly in HTS and al-Shara, but now you have the ISIS forces resurgence. So this is a cataclysm, which is the result of not paying attention. By getting distracted. I'm not criticizing. I'm the biggest supporter of the president and all the great things that he's done. But you can't spend time with Greenland. Karl Rove has an amazing piece in the Wall Street Journal today. Is Trump trying to lose the midterms? And he argues that by focusing on all these issues, he's deflecting attention from other important issues. But by the way, most American people don't support the issue of Greenland. Now, on the Muslim Brotherhood, the way I would see it, it's kind of like a Janus face. It's kind of like who you're looking at. Who are you looking at, and what do they look like when they look at you? Now, sometimes it's, as you say very well, a mixed bag because Turkey is a NATO power, and it has been a major participant in ISAF, in NATO activities, and it is an ally of the United States. And at the same time, Turkey and Qatar, allies of the United States, are in terms of some of their policies questionable in terms of whether they're supporting U.S. policy. But again, if you ask President Trump, he will say he has a press conference and he says, I've got to stop the press conference. I have an important call with President Erdogan, who he describes as a great guy. So he thinks al-Shara and President Erdogan and all these people, and he has these impressions, and it's his right as president. But then he should not be outsourcing important issues or neglecting these important issues which are going to cause a cataclysm in the Middle East. You can't focus on one thing like Greenland and then expect these fires to be put out. And the problem is, I'll just say one last point, what are American troops doing? They're taking the prisoners from the ISIS prisons in Syria and they're moving them to Iraq because they don't trust al-Shara to keep them in prison. So we have a mess over there, and it's kind of dealing with parties that have as you say, a mixed bag, questionable, we're not sure. We need to clamp down on these issues or they're going to get out of control.
Well, Mark, let me tell you my problem. And I think I'm just parroting what Bernard Lewis, the great British historian and political thinker, said. I've said this before on this show. I'm sure I've said this to you in other conversations, both on the air and personally. I really do believe that there's a war of civilizations going on. That was Bernard Lewis's concept. And people do not want to accept this. They don't want to believe that there's a war of civilizations because they believe everybody can sit down and have a conversation. You can make nice, you can cut a deal, it's transactional, and then you move on. Everything will be just swell. But you're dealing with an adversary that is an ideological driven, a religious fanatic group. It has a view of the world.
You're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood?
Right, the Muslim Brotherhood. And let's be clear, Turkey is just as bad in its way as the Iranians. Left to their own devices, they're just rivals with Iran for who can be the champions of this Islamist hegemonic regime, worldwide regime. And you can't trust Turkey. Turkey only plays for its own interests. It suppresses its own people. It tortures, arrests, kills its own people. It suppresses free elections. And he is a dictator par excellence. And Trump should get off this business of saying people are just swell guys and he's good people. Stop that nonsense already. You don't say they're nice guys and they're good people and you can cut a deal, because certain people you can't cut a deal with. So my view about Turkey is we better wake up to Turkey, because if there's a vacuum of leadership of the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood, Turkey is ready, willing, and able to pick it up. And the fact that Turkey is a so-called member of NATO, except and it wants stuff from the United States, that's a real problem because we have bases there, we have relationships with them. But let's not be naive. You cannot trust Turkey. And you certainly can't trust Qatar. You can't trust Qatar at all because they've been the home and the financiers of this Islamic Brotherhood, this Muslim Brotherhood. Mark, final thoughts because we have to sign off for today's show.
I think this is very, very accurate. And interestingly enough, to your point about the F-35, which Turkey wants to get from the United States, I think what has happened in Syria is definitely, I think, going to hurt that effort because Congress is right on this and they see what's going on in Syria and they're very disturbed by it. And the president's not paying attention to it. So I think that down the road, I think Saudi asked for it, probably they'll get it. But there's a real big issue here in terms of evaluating, as you pointed out, Turkish-U.S. relations, which have been up and down, bumpy and very good. And right now, as you say, the president's point of view. But again, you'd have to look at Congress. And I think this is something that people don't look at. And at the end of the day, listen to Jim Risch in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee chair. He said Turkey will never get the F-35 so long as they have the S-400. So there is a sentiment in Congress more attentive to detail. And unfortunately, where we have the administration or the executive branch, which needs to get on the case and stop distracting itself with issues that are marginal and pick up issues and follow them through to conclusion. And that's woefully needed, I think, in this administration. Well, as great as the president is, I have to say that.
Well, as great as you are, Dr. Mark Meirowitz, Jesse and Eric and I are delighted that you were able to join us again. We look forward to having you again on the show to bring your expertise, your wisdom, and your analysis. This has been Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia, Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. We're very thankful that Dr. Mark Meirowitz joined us today. We look forward to being with you again next week. And as always, God bless you, God bless your families, and of course, God bless America. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to Let the Record Show. You can hear Let the Record Show Sunday mornings at 6. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Car shopping shouldn't feel like preparing for a marathon of paperwork. That's why Carvana makes buying and financing your car easy. From start to finish, search thousands of vehicles with great prices. All online, all on your time. And when you're ready, your new car shows up right at your door. It doesn't get better than that. Buy your car the easy way. On Carvana. Delivery fees may apply.